It was a moment nobody saw coming. Live on air, under those blazing studio lights, when Steve Harvey's world shifted forever. During what began as a heartfelt segment on the power of purpose, Steve Harvey received an astonishing message from halfway across the globe. The words poured in from Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré, respectful, admiring, raw with emotion, and they caught Steve so off guard he broke down in tears on live TV. In that instant, two influential figures forged an unscripted bond that would reverberate around the world. Steve strode onto his set wearing that familiar ear-to-ear grin. The audience roared their applause, and Steve, brimming with energy, dove into his opening story, a candid recounting of the poverty he overcame. It was shaping up to be an ordinary, uplifting segment, until a production assistant hurried onto the stage and whispered urgently into Steve's ear. He froze, confusion flickering across his face, then surprise, then silence. Clearing his throat, Steve faced the camera. "Folks, I've just been told there's a very special message for me, and it's coming from somewhere I never expected." On the giant screen behind him, a golden seal appeared above the bold legend, "Message from President Ibrahim Traoré." Not a whisper stirred in the studio, not a cough. Steve sank into his chair, eyes riveted to the screen, and murmured, "Why would the president of Burkina Faso send me a message? I don't even know what this is about." Moments later, the video began. A serene backdrop, a simple wooden desk, and behind it the red-green flag of Burkina Faso. Then, President Traoré himself, his gaze steady, his voice calm and gentle. Steve leaned forward, knuckles whitening, around his chair's arms. "Mr. Steve Harvey," Traoré began in flawless English laced with his soft African accent, "I speak not only as your counterpart, but as a brother. You do not know me, but we know you." The entire studio leaned in. "In the villages of Burkina Faso, your voice travels farther than you might imagine. Your words of strength, faith, and second chances have reached people you'll never meet." Steve blinked, stunned, his hands trembling. Traoré's tone thickened with feeling. "In our darkest nights, when war threatened our peace, your story gave me hope. You reminded me that leadership isn't a title, it's purpose and heart." Silence fell like rain. Traoré's eyes locked on the camera. From a soldier who rose to lead his people, to a boy who once had nothing in America, I thank you. Steve's lips parted, but only tears came. He fumbled for a tissue as Traoré continued. "I've watched you cry for others, laugh with strangers, and give to those who felt forgotten." Tears streamed down Steve's face. Traoré's voice echoed, "We call that kind of heart a heart of the sun. Warm, brave, and radiating light." Steve finally whispered, "Wow." The president paused, then added, "This message is not political. It is personal. I see in you the story of a man who never gave up, and it reminds me to never give up on my people." The screen faded to black, except for one final phrase in Moré, Burkina Faso's native tongue. Steve turned to his team, voice cracking. "What did he say at the end?" A translator rose and answered softly. He said, "Even the strongest man needs to be reminded that his voice still matters." Steve covered his face. The audience wept. Even the cameraman's hands shook. This was no mere TV moment. It was two souls meeting across oceans, linked by struggle and brotherhood. And somehow, it felt like just the beginning. Steve sat motionless, hands folded, eyes glistening. The studio waited in silence, because in that hush lay the weight of truth, connection, and the powerful reminder that sometimes a single voice can change a life. The room broke into gentle applause, but Steve raised a trembling hand. "This isn't about applause," he whispered. "This is about purpose." Backstage, producers hovered over the control panel debating a commercial break. Steve refused. "I want the world to hear every second of this. Don't stop the feed." As the cameras zoomed in, the screen behind him flickered, and President Traoré appeared live, not pre-recorded. Steve's breath caught. "Mr. Harvey," Traoré began, smiling softly, "let me speak to you, man to man, not as one president to another, but as one dreamer to another." Silence fell again, thick with anticipation. Traoré leaned forward, his voice low and sincere. "You see me now as a president," he said, "but I was once a boy with no shoes. I walked barefoot to school, carried tattered books, and many nights I went to bed hungry." Steve bowed his head, shoulders quivering. Tears threatened. Traoré continued, "As a teenager, I witnessed war's worst horrors. I saw people give up, but I also saw them rise." He paused, then shared an unexpected revelation. "One day, in a crowded internet cafe, I saw your video, 'Don't Give Up.' I didn't understand all your words, but I felt your tears, your passion, your hope." Steve looked up, stunned. "You helped a young boy in Burkina Faso believe he could be more than his pain. And that boy became me." The crowd gasped. Tears streamed freely. Traoré's gentle smile returned. "So, when I heard your voice again, last week, speaking about purpose, I knew it was time to speak back." Steve's face was hidden as Traoré spoke the words no one expected. He drew a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. "Mr. Harvey," he said, "you once said you wanted to visit Africa not as a celebrity, but as a brother, a man who gives back." Steve nodded, voice a whisper. "Yes, I did." "Well," Traoré smiled, "I want to invite you, personally, to Burkina Faso. Not for cameras or headlines, but to see the seeds your voice has planted in our soil." A wave of emotion crashed through the studio. "You've helped lift spirits across oceans. Now, let me show you the lives you've changed." Steve's hands shook, speechless at the offer. Then Traoré delivered the final heartbreaking line. "There's a young orphanage in Ouagadougou. The children there know your name. They pray with your words, laugh with your jokes, but most of all, they believe they matter, because you mattered." Steve rose to his feet, tears glistening in his eyes. The audience joined him, silent applause mingled with sobs. "In 7 days," Traoré added, "they will gather in the village square, waiting to meet the man whose words crossed oceans and healed hearts." The countdown had begun. The very next morning, Steve packed a single bag. No cameras, no press, just his carry-on and a heart full of questions. As his plane soared over the Atlantic, Steve gazed out the window, memories flooding back. Childhood, nights of hunger in Cleveland, dreams that seemed too big, and now this, called by a president who knew that pain. He whispered into the hum of the engines, "God, why me?" Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, President Traoré stood before a sunlit courtyard of children and declared, "He's coming." A little girl in the back clutched a notebook, her letter to Steve. Her name was Aka. At 10 years old, soft-spoken and wise beyond her years, she trembled as she waited for the man whose words had changed her world. "Dear Mr. Steve, my name is Acha. My papa died 2 years ago. My mama is sick, and some nights I cry myself to sleep. But one day, someone played your video. You. And you said you were born to do something great. I believed you. Thank you for speaking to us." In his car, meeting a child who sometimes slept hungry. In that moment, it felt as if the sky itself whispered. They were meant to find each other. Arrival, just after noon, Steve Harvey's plane touched down on the dusty runway. Stepping into the blazing sun, he shielded his eyes and saw no paparazzi, no fanfare, only 2 translators, a young aide holding a simple sign. "Welcome, Brother Steve." His heart pounded as the convoy wound through narrow streets lined with humble homes and bustling markets. Children waved shyly, mothers offered gentle smiles, At the orphanage gates, Steve froze. Over 100 children had gathered, each holding a handmade sign. "You matter." "Thank you, Mr. Steve. We love you." Tears brimmed in his eyes. President Traoré emerged in a plain white shirt and traditional cloth. He stepped forward and wrapped Steve in a brotherly embrace. "Welcome home," he whispered. Steve couldn't speak until a tiny voice rang out, "Steve! Steve!" Acha approached, trembling, notebook extended. "This is for you," she murmured. He knelt, unfolded her letter, and read each line in stunned silence. Then he wept, openly, uncontrollably. Every person there felt it. This wasn't a visit. It was a divine appointment. Revelation backstage. During a brief commercial break, Steve sat frozen backstage. A producer handed him a translation of Ibrahim's full message. He read, "When I was a boy, hiding under my grandmother's market stall, I'd hear her laugh as she listened to your voice on a crackling radio. She didn't know English, but your spirit made her smile. That voice helped raise me." Steve covered his mouth, voice hushed. "Oh my God." The cameras returned, and Steve looked into the lens, tears glistening. "This world is smaller than we think, and our words travel farther than we ever imagine." The audience sat in stunned silence, unaware that this moment was only the prologue to something far greater. The personal call Steve stepped off stage, still clutching Acha's letter. He was meant to greet his next guest, but he refused. In his dressing room, phone in hand, he called his producer. "Get me a line to Ouagadougou. I want to speak to President Traoré today." 2 hours later, a secure Zoom link lit up. There, calm and humble, sat Ibrahim Traoré, his eyes the weight of a nation and the warmth of a brother. Steve, voice trembling. "Mr. President, I'm just a comedian from Cleveland. I never imagined my words would reach someone like you." Traoré, smiling, "And I'm just a soldier who loves his people. Yet even soldiers need hope. You gave me that. Now I want to give something back." Steve leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Traoré's voice softened. "Come to Burkina Faso. Just for one day. There's someone you must meet." Steve froze. That single invitation would change his life forever. Night of reflection. He barely slept. "That voice helped raise me," echoed in his mind. He thought of his own mother, the woman who taught him to dream. Years ago, he'd prayed, "God, if I ever get famous, let my words mean something." On a brief live stream that night, he held up Acha's letter and spoke from the heart. "I've been blessed with fame and success, but this message, from a leader I've never met. This is God. I made a promise once, and I'm keeping it." That night, Steve returned live, not with jokes or a monologue, but with a truth he could no longer keep inside. He held up Acha's translated letter, eyes glistening. "Y'all, I've been blessed with fame, money, success. But this message from a leader I've never met, this letter from a boy raised by a grandmother who didn't know English but felt me, that's God. I made a promise once and I'm keeping it." In that moment, Steve decided he would go to Burkina Faso, not for ratings or cameras, but for something far greater. A flight of faith Steve boarded a private jet to Ouagadougou, heart heavy yet hopeful. He brought no film crew, only his assistant, a translator and a journal he hadn't opened in years. As the engines roared, he reread the letter and paused at the line underlined in red. "I wish my mother could have seen the man you helped me become." Leaning back in his seat, he whispered into the hum of the cabin, "What did I do to deserve this honor?" Mid-flight, the assistant presented a small wax-sealed envelope from President Traoré. Inside lay a handwritten note. "When you land, think not as a celebrity, but as a son coming home." Steve pressed the note to his heart, realizing this trip was about healing wounds unseen by any camera. Dawn in Ouagadougou, touching down at sunrise, Steve stepped onto the tarmac into a gentle silence. No crowds, no flashbulbs, just two black SUVs and a lone guard. President Traoré himself descended the stairs. Unsure what to say, Steve stood still. Then Traoré closed the distance and embraced him like a brother. No words were needed. Traoré, softly, "You came." Steve, voice choked, "I had to." They rode through dusty streets in companionable quiet. Children waved. Some held hand-drawn posters. "We love you, Mr. Steve." Their first stop wasn't the presidential palace, but a weathered market. Rows of wooden stalls brimmed with fruit, spices, and fabrics. At the very back, Traoré pointed. "This was my grandmother's stall. Here, I listened to you on a crackling radio as I helped her count coins." Steve knelt to the dirt. Traoré picked up a small pebble and placed it in Steve's palm. This is where hope began. Steve's tears fell freely, and Traoré's did too. Meeting Awa an hour later, they arrived at a humble village. Under a lone mango tree, a group of women waited. One elderly woman, Awa, stepped forward, hands trembling. Traoré explained, "This is Awa, my grandmother's oldest friend. She remembers you, Mr. Steve." Steve looked astonished. Traoré smiled. "She didn't understand your English, but she felt your joy." Awa leaned in. Through the translator, her trembling voice carried straight to Steve's soul. That man has a heart that speaks louder than his tongue. In that moment, Steve Harvey wasn't a celebrity. He was family, welcomed home by the woman whose laughter once filled his travels. Steve knelt on the dusty ground, tears streaming down his cheeks. Awa reached out, her gnarled hand brushing his cheek, and whispered softly in Moray. The translator's voice cracked as she relayed the words. "My sister would have fed you if she'd met you. She would have called you her son." In that single moment, Steve Harvey ceased to be a celebrity and became the son Awa had never known, welcomed home by a mother's unwavering love. The world watched, breathless. A song of two grandmothers. That evening, under a twilight sky, Steve was escorted to a simple courtyard school. No cameras, no stage lights, only a circle of nervous children and the soft beat of drums. As he stepped inside, little voices rose in a hymn sung entirely in Moray, a lullaby once hummed by President Traoré's grandmother at her market stall. Steve froze, heart pounding as he recognized the melody his own grandmother in Cleveland had hummed when he was a boy. Tears welled in his eyes. "I remember this," he whispered. "My grandma used to hum this when I cried." President Traoré stood beside him, arms folded in gentle solidarity. "Our grandmothers gave us the same comfort, thousands of miles apart." Steve lowered himself onto a weathered wooden bench surrounded by the children. One brave girl stepped forward, offering him a small wooden carving, two hands clasped around a heart. Steve lifted it to his chest and began to weep openly, years of pain, loss, and unanswered questions pouring out in the place he least expected. Two sons, one from Ohio, one from Ouagadougou, had found a bond no script could ever capture. A gift of home. Before his departure, Traoré led Steve to a quiet field just outside the capital. A solitary tree stood amid a ring of golden sunflowers. Beneath it, he presented a rolled certificate tied with a scarlet ribbon. "This land now belongs to you," Traoré announced, "a place of peace, a gift from Burkina Faso, so that whenever you feel lost, you have a home here." Steve shook, his head, voice thick with emotion. "I didn't come for a gift. I came because your letter reminded me of my own humanity." Traoré placed a hand over Steve's heart and knelt, a gesture of rare humility. "I don't kneel for many." He said, his voice soft. But I kneel for hearts that change lives. Steve fell to his knees beside him, and together 2 leaders wept like young boys missing their grandmothers, united in grief and gratitude. A new beginning, back in the United States, Steve returned to his show in solemn silence. He refused any fanfare. When the cameras rolled, he walked on stage holding the wooden carving, a testament to the bond he'd forged. Gently, he placed it on his desk and addressed his audience. In my life, I've received countless awards and gifts, but none like this. I met a man, a president not only of a nation but of the human heart, Ibrahim Traoré. He reminded me that love, honor, and memory are far stronger than any fame. He called me a son of Africa. I call him my brother. Then, breaking from tradition, Steve cued the musicians and played the children's song live. No subtitles, no interpretation, just pure, innocent voices echoing across screens worldwide. Millions watched. Millions wept. Comments poured in, stories of healing and unity transcending borders. One story, one tear, one heart at a time. Steve's final plea was simple yet profound. If this touched your heart, even just a little, please like this video, subscribe, and comment the word "healed" below. Let's spread this feeling to